Story 1. My students were debating what hurt the most when being beaten by a parent. The whole conversation was disturbing, to say the least, but one child won when he mentioned the television cord. He even stood up, removed his shirt, and showed the scars. The scars resembled those of Django. The classroom went from laughter to complete silence and then to crying. Story 2. I once had a student who showed up late every day to first period. After class, I told him his tardiness was becoming an issue. He said he was doing the best he could because he had to help raise his younger siblings. His father was an alcoholic and his mother lived in another state. He said he had to take his 3 younger siblings to school and drop them off because his father was usually passed out from alcohol. Story 3. One of my best students arrived late after a number of other students had been coming in late. I had warned there would be consequences for the next students who were late. I walked over to talk to him. He nearly started crying, so we stepped outside. I turned him away from the classroom and asked what was wrong. It turned out he had been kicked out of his house, was living in his car, and his phone, which served as his alarm, had died. He felt terrible about being late. I told him I was proud of him for making it to class. I said I would pretend to be angry so the class would think I was keeping my word, but that he was doing great and could take a few minutes to collect himself before rejoining us. I even exaggerated my expressions to sell it. He went on to ace my class. He was amazing. Story 4. A student did not attend school for 2 weeks. When he finally returned, he was limping and his foot was wrapped in a large, dirty ace bandage. I called him to my office after school to check on him. He said he had been in the river fishing for his dinner 2 weeks earlier and slipped on a rock, cutting his foot so badly that he could not walk until that day. He had not seen his parents in so long that he did not know how to contact them for help getting to the hospital. I called Child Protective Services and arranged for as much help as they could provide. We learned he had been living in a tent because the house had been foreclosed on when his parents disappeared. Several teachers chipped in to buy him groceries and clothing, and they began driving him to places he needed to go. More than 2 years later, he has a job, and one of our teachers still provides him with clothing and food. He is too proud to live with anyone and sometimes hops from couch to couch. He is strong and resilient. He is an incredible person, and I believe he will change the world one day. Story 5. A few years ago, a student came into class very late, escorted by an official. He threw his bag on the floor and sat frowning. The day before, when he went home, his foster parents had decided they no longer wanted him, so he was taken into the care of social services. His situation deteriorated after that. I was also in an interview with a mother and her son. She told us she was not very concerned about him because he was not her favorite child. The defeated look on her son's face still tears me up. Story 6. School counselor here. In my second year, I had a courageous student who suffered from a rare, debilitating disease. She did not have many friends because she was rarely in school and was often in hospitals. She loved reading. She brought books with her to the hospital. Unfortunately, because of the disease, her eyesight was deteriorating and she knew she would eventually go blind. She cried in my office that she would miss her books and did not want to be alone in the dark. I could not help crying with her. She transitioned to audiobooks on her iPod. This was roughly 14 years ago, a time when middle school students did not have smartphones. A year later, she passed away. I hope she is at peace, reading all the books she wants with other friends she has met. Thank you for the awards and comments. If I can pass on anything to educators, it is this piece of advice I received from a principal many years ago. Be kind to your students. The 7 hours they have in school may be the best 7 hours of their day. We are never certain what goes on in their homes. Story 7. I received a message today explaining why a student could not attend class yesterday. Sorry, I could not come to class. There were gunshots right outside my apartment and I thought I was going to die. The police did come eventually and I had to give a statement. I will get the work from yesterday done today. Thanks. Yes, you may have that extension. Story 8. I told a student I was going to call his parents because he was acting out in class. His response was, "If you find them, let me know where they are." Story 9. I am hungry. How much time until the break? I will quit school and become a criminal because robbing is the only thing I am good at. I was a teacher at a public school in a poor region of São Paulo, Brazil. Many children had problems at home. Many were missing a father and lived in small houses in the slums. The first child did not have food at home. All teachers knew about it. His mother had many problems and all his siblings were in the same situation, so every day the most important thing for him was to eat. The teenager apparently had food, but there was a history of violence in his family. He had already committed crimes and he probably felt validated by that because he felt bad and stupid in other activities. I was not the regular teacher. I was part of a non-governmental organization that offered specific attention to students who were behind their peers. Every day I would go to their regular class and pick 6 to 10 of them for special lessons. At the beginning they felt humiliated and other students called them stupid. At the end of the program many students wanted to join us and our students felt much more confident. It was great, but we did not solve the hunger problem, and the teenager was not convinced he had a future outside crime. Story 10. I taught at an inner-city charter school. I had a bright 6th grade girl who began falling asleep during my classes, which was not like her. When I asked after school what was wrong, she told me that her family, which included her 2 younger sisters and her mother who used crack, had moved into a homeless shelter, and the last time she slept through the night all their belongings were stolen. Story 11. A female university student in China told me that her mother tried to sell her for $8 when she was a baby. Story 12. A few weeks ago, one of the children I teach online had a bandage on her left temple, so I asked what had happened. She said, "My mother was angry with me and threw a pencil that stuck in my head and caused bleeding." Story 13. A girl was sitting on the carpet, playing with an object. She rolled it back and forth, put it in her mouth, then took it out and rolled it again. I told her to give it to me when the other students began independent work. She gave me a large green pill. At recess I asked her about it. She said her mother and father gave her and her siblings one of these every night to help them sleep. I took the pill to the school administration and told them what she had said. I then searched images online to identify it. I found a short list and returned to the administration, but I was told it was not my job to worry about that. I tried several times that day to get answers. They said they thought it was melatonin and told me to stop overstepping. The girl and her siblings moved in and out of foster care and often came to school without food and in filthy clothes. She came to school in a sweatshirt covered in dried blood for 3 days in a row. Her parents would not sign the papers to enroll the children in the free school lunch program. I forged the mother's signature every month. Story 14. I don't want to give too many details, but during my 4 years of teaching, I had to fill out 4 Child Protective Services reports. 3 for students who either confided in me or showed signs of physical abuse, and 1 for sexual abuse by the child's father. It's honestly the worst part of the job, having to hear and see the awfulness some children endure. Story 15. My mom is an English teacher and once told me about a 13-year-old boy whose mother had committed suicide a few years earlier. In a creative writing task, the prompt involved discovering a secret. The boy wrote a descriptive piece about finding a body hanging in his front room, lifeless and swinging. Heartbreaking. His counselors were consulted, and he was told to just write from the heart. Story 16. It was my first year teaching and the holidays were approaching. A 2nd grade student asked me why Santa visits everyone else's home but skips hers. On Christmas Eve, my father and I played Santa, dropping off gifts at their home for each child with, of course, the permission of the legal guardians. The parents were in jail. Story 17. A student's mother showed up for the first time in almost a year. She was well-dressed and looked like someone from a fashion magazine, with the latest phone, flashy jewelry, and expensive clothes. The student, on the other hand, was always shabbily dressed. He once went without a blazer for a week because his parents were not buying him one. We allowed him to wear his sports jersey in class, which is normally not allowed, and we constantly called the parents to no avail. She showed the slightest interest in her child, telling us to make him study however we saw fit and even hinting at hitting him if he did not behave. After a lot of talking and counseling, it turned out that the student came from a well-to-do family, but his parents did not get along. The father went away on business trips for weeks at a time and had multiple affairs, while the mother was doing the same at home. It was an open secret. The child acted out just to get attention at school that he was not getting at home. I really felt for him. He was 11 at the time. Story 18. I taught summer workshops for teens for a few years. These workshops were based on electives and were rather pricey for students to attend. In complete honesty, it was really just bougie summer daycare, and I always felt bad for the teens because the administration was super neurotic about the education, so the curriculum was boring as hell. They are kids. They want to spend their summers having fun, but wealthy helicopter parents expect differently. One year I had this absolute monster of a kid. He was 13, rowdy, inappropriate, did not do any work, and constantly threw things around. The administration tried to remove him, but his grandmother had begged us to keep him on board. Since they were paying good money, the administration agreed under the terms that we would just leave him alone. I did not agree with that at all. No kid should just be ignored, so I did not. I always tried to encourage the kid's strange jokes and interests and would take him on a walk around the school grounds every day. I gave as good as I got with the sass, and he enjoyed it. We explored in used classrooms, kicked around rocks, and joked about whatever YouTube videos he liked. We talked, and he started to trust me, and he told me about his life. His parents both worked in the airline industry and as a result were very wealthy with homes all over North America, but they were never home. During the school year, he was mostly alone with them, popping in here and there, and in the summers they would fly him to his grandmother who lived in our small city. She would care for him for the summers before he would get flown out to wherever his parents were staying for a couple of days to pretend they were a loving family. Then the cycle would repeat. He was so aggressively lonely, did not believe anyone cared about him, and was constantly acting out. He would skateboard all over the surrounding cities. For a couple of summers, the first would run into him in the strangest places and at odd times, outside bars on late Saturday nights, randomly in the big city in the middle of the week, or driving by him skateboarding on the side of the highway. He had no one looking after him and no concern for his own well-being and safety. The lack of care for him was heartbreaking, and I tried to do what I could, but ultimately his parents did not actually break any laws based on their home state rules and regulations, and they were, again, very wealthy. He was well provided for, and how nice that they sent him to this expensive summer workshop. I still think about him now and then, even though it has been years. I hope he is okay. Story 19. My mom taught in a very low-income school, and every year she would go to the dollar store and pick up Christmas presents for all of her students. She knew that many of them did not receive any other gifts for the holiday. She also had stories about how they needed to be careful when constructing standardized tests because some students might answer a question like, "What do you do when you are hungry?" with "go to bed" or something similar. Story 20. I had a 10-year-old crying and saying she wished she was dead. Her older brothers at home were being awful to her, bullying and hitting her. She said she wanted to be allowed to kill herself so she would not be a bother to us or to her brothers anymore. I sat her down with the teacher, offered a cup of tea and some cookies, and talked with her throughout the afternoon. There was little I could do about the brothers, but she left with a smile and returned to school the next day smiling. I am keeping an eye on her in case things deteriorate, but so far so good. Our conversation apparently encouraged her to tell her mother what had happened, so someone at home is also watching out for her. Story 21. I work with students with significant disabilities and autism in an elementary school. We have one student who, at the end of the day when we say it's time to go home, almost always pipes up, "Time to go home and to bed." We get out of school at 2 p.m. As I understand it from a coworker who knows someone who worked with the family since the boys were toddlers, their mother sends them both to bed immediately. We guess they lie in bed and watch YouTube on tablets. The younger brother has mild leg deformities because he was never allowed out of his crib to walk as a toddler, so his legs are bowed. Before someone asks, no, this is not enough for Child Protective Services to do anything. Fair warning. Do not read if you have a weak stomach. I have another student who also has a brother in another class in the same situation, who comes to school with pants so tight it is like the old Victorian era, where women needed a maid to force a boot into their back to close a corset. At first we commented to the mother, but eventually we were like, okay, they are clearly too small. We will just leave the button undone and it is not too bad. One day the brother ate feces. He literally reached into his pull-up, they are 8 and 10 years old by the way, grabbed some and put it in his mouth while walking at recess. It happened too fast for us to stop him. We were alarmed and called the mother. Her response was, "I told you all to keep his pants buttoned." This woman puts pants on them so small that some of the paraprofessionals physically do not have the strength to button them, instead of taking the time to teach her children basic skills. They also do not know how to feed themselves. To be clear, one of them is doing math. They are not low-functioning enough to lack basic self-care skills. Neither of them is capable of responding to a verbal question. One brother can point to an answer or point to what he wants, but neither can speak or indicate yes or no. Neither knows how to shake their head, give a thumbs up or down, or otherwise respond. The sad truth in this demographic is that parental involvement often holds children back more than their disabilities. Both sets of brothers I described would likely be in resource classrooms if their parents were more involved. One of the 4 might not need placement, but the other 3 almost certainly would. The little boy who stays in bed is in 1st grade and is the highest academically of all our students with significant disabilities and autism in grades 1 through 5. Story 22. I was one of those students. The school nurse saw marks on my back and asked what they were. I told her I had been beaten at home for the smallest mistakes. I was not living with my father at the time. He often went to rehabilitation. A police officer examined my body for more marks, and social workers arrived while I was cared for by a kind elderly couple. Nothing came of it, but I was punished in other ways that did not leave visible marks. Story 23. I was not a teacher but a student. I was absent a lot but always handed him an excuse note the next day. One day he came to me with all of them and said that none of the signatures matched and therefore must have been forged. I told him it was because sometimes my mom was very tired when I got her to sign it. In reality, sometimes she was under the influence of drugs and could barely hold a pen to sign her name. By the end of the school year, it was obvious to all my teachers that my mother had a drug problem. When he took his evidence to the office, they informed him that my mother had called in every one of my absences. He apologized the next day. Story 24. Every week I let students earn raffle tickets that could win them a prize, such as bringing in a show and tell item or choosing something from my treasure chest. One day a student brought her favorite doll, and the other girls began talking about their dolls. One student quietly told me she had never had a doll. That made sense because she was homeless, wore the same dirty clothes almost every day, often stole from teachers and classmates because she had adapted to a survival of the fittest way of life, and her parents were absent. That night I went to Toys R Us right after school. The next week I made sure this girl won a prize and stocked my treasure chest with a brand new teacher and student Barbie set. She picked the Barbie right away. The most touching part was when she asked if she could do show and tell with her new Barbie. I said yes. At the beginning of her show and tell, she introduced the student Barbie as her name and the teacher Barbie as mine. I was so touched. Story 25. Not a teacher, but I remember from high school. I told a friend I was proud of him for his work outside school. He teared up and thanked me because he had never been told that before. His father had been cruel to him, so he may not have had anyone tell him. That moment hit me hard, and I will never forget it. Story 26. I taught a student who had an intellectual disability. For example, I had a test question that asked, "Who is the founder of Buddhism?" And the choices were me, the principal, the assistant principal, and the correct answer. He came back from his accommodation room and said, "I chose you for the last question." He did not understand why that was wrong. The administration had called him in to discuss things before, but talking to him never produced results because it was like herding cats. One morning while walking to class he said, "Hey Mr. Fungineer, this morning my poppy tried to choke me, threw me on the ground, and took my phone. But don't tell anybody, okay?" I swear it was like a different kid was talking because he was so focused and direct. Luckily Child Protective Services and possibly the police got involved. Story 27. I had a teacher in high school who, on the first day, told us, almost begged us, to talk to him if we needed help. He told the class that there were at least 5 students living in poverty and probably more dealing with difficult circumstances. He said that each of our lives was more important than anything he needed to teach from the social studies textbook, and that he did not want to see more students fail because they were too busy watching their mother to make sure she did not overdose, or going to work after school because their family could not pay the bills. I will never forget the shock on the faces in the classroom because the area I lived in had half the kids driving BMW cars to school and the other half waiting in line at the food bank to eat. I remember little from school, but I never forgot that man's words. Luckily, I ran into him recently at a restaurant. I politely thanked him for that lesson and quietly paid for his and his partner's meals. I will continue to take a slightly deeper look at the people I meet, remembering there are 2 sides to every story. Story 28. I tutor Chinese children online. Some are sent to private boarding schools when they reach middle school. Most do 3 to 4 hours of homework a night and have classes on Saturdays and Sundays. One boy is 11 years old. When I ask what he does for fun, his only response is homework. He does not play video games or watch television or movies. His parents force him to study and read all day, every day. The only time he plays with other children is at lunch or during physical education class. I have other students like this who live at home. Some of my students are taught that going to the cinema is a waste of time, that video games and cartoons are bad, and that they must study all weekend to get into a good university. The children can seem like zombies. It is sometimes difficult to see them with no joy. One girl said the highlight of her week was that she did not receive a lot of homework that weekend. Story 29. I had a girl miss several lessons last term. I was concerned about her progress and followed up on the absences. Next time I saw her, we had a short chat and she said she was really struggling with things at home. The following day, she arrived early with a letter and asked me to read it after she had left. The letter said she was unable to tell her story out loud but wanted me to know. Her story described a difficult home situation. I redacted the details out of respect for the pupil, as I had no idea this would become so widely read. Completely floored me. I had a lesson starting in 15 minutes, but I could not stop crying. It felt awful that this strong, silent young girl could come to class carrying this weight. We made a plan to help her feel safer at school. She struggles to be around large groups of people and to be near doorways unless a trusted adult is close by. She is terrified that he will come into school to take her. We now spend our breaks and lunchtimes in my classroom, playing games and watching short, silly videos online. If she has a bad day, I walk her to her bus. I make sure she is seated away from the door and near a friend or my desk. It is not much, but every little bit helps her feel safer. Thank you so much for your kind words. Some people were concerned about her safety. To clarify, safeguarding pupils is a major part of my job. The correct agencies have been informed and she is receiving counseling to help her through her situation. The police have been informed and the whole school is doing everything it can to protect her. I hope you all have a lovely Halloween. Story 30. A girl about 17 years old had 4 younger siblings. Both of her parents had cancer and were not able to work. She had a job and almost all of her free time went to work and to caring for her family. She was tired all the time, missed assignment deadlines and other commitments, but she still participated more actively in class than most other students. Story 31. A 5-year-old girl was crying at the lunch table. I told her she would see her mother soon and that it was okay. I did not know her very well. She said, "My mother is in jail." I asked, "Your father?" She said, "He is in jail too." Her twin sister said, "We live with our grandmother." I was about to cry, so I asked if they needed anything. They asked for candy. I always carried caramels in my purse because they are safe candy and the children love them and knew I had them. I gave each of them a handful of caramels and sat with them until their grandmother arrived an hour later. We colored together. Each saved caramels for their grandmother. I will never forget those 2 little girls. Story 32. I once had a young man with strange round markings on his arms that I could not figure out. They looked a little like vaccine scars. I thought they might be cultural scarification because I live in a melting pot country. We had a pretty good relationship, so I asked him, He told me they were cigarette burns from when he was a baby. Story 33. I had a student who would not acknowledge my presence at all. He was completely silent, and what depressed me was his lack of engagement until I found out why. Several years ago, I had a boy in my English 10 honors class when he was a sophomore. He was quiet and chose to sit with his back to me every single day. I tried to get him to talk to me a few times, but he was so shy and withdrawn that I stopped because I did not want to make him feel more awkward and uncomfortable than he already did. He was an average student. When he turned in homework, it was often half done. His classwork was sloppy, and I usually felt he was not paying attention. That year, I had a rough group of classes. Students were fighting. A girl was beaten by her boyfriend and almost killed. A very tall male student threatened me, and my administration was not very supportive, so I was hanging on by the skin of my teeth. I allowed the young man to sit quietly in the back of the class because he was not causing any problems. When we reached the essay unit, I was completely surprised by his paper. It was the most well-written and analytical essay I had seen in a long time. I wrote him an encouraging comment and began to pay closer attention to him in a low-key way. Fast forward to his junior year, I asked if he would join the school newspaper. I was the advisor. He did, and over the next 2 years I watched him change and develop into a leader in the class. He came out of his shell and became very involved in the paper, learning how to program and do layouts and other tasks. When he graduated, he wrote in my yearbook that when he was a sophomore he was being initiated into a gang, and it was my encouragement that gave him the courage to leave that lifestyle. He joined the Navy and is currently in a Doctor of Philosophy program at Duke University. I still talk to him once in a while. He is doing amazingly well, married and happy. Story 34. I'm a history teacher, and this year I made my first lesson of the whole term for my Year 7 classes, ages 11 to 12, about timelines. I explained time and chronology, ran some short quizzes, and made a timeline about a historical figure's life. Finally, I asked the students to make a timeline of their own lives. Many of them did not know what to include. They said not much had happened to them, which was fair. In my encouraging way, I gave some examples of things they could put down. Have any of you got younger brothers or sisters? When were they born? Do you have any pets? When did they join your family? Have you ever moved house? All very valid questions. And at the end, I asked if anyone wanted to share something from their timeline. I would make a jokey comment to keep things light. Yes, Liba? I broke my leg when I was 4. Oh, really? Was it from swinging on a chair? I can see you doing that. Charlie? I got a pet tortoise called Tom last year. Wow. Bet he can run faster than me. Laura? My mom stopped drinking in 2019. Let's just say I had no response to that one. Story 35. Not a teacher, just a student. 2 years ago, I slept a lot in class, did not participate, and my grades worsened every month. One day, my history teacher asked me to stay after class because he was worried. He asked if I had problems at home, and I told him how messed up my life was. I told him my father is an alcoholic, that he sometimes beat me and screamed all day, saying things such as "you will never be good enough" or "your life will always be useless and a waste of my time and money." He also used to hit my mother and my little sister and was very narcissistic. Luckily, I have not spoken to my father in 2 years, and we pretty much ignore each other. My teacher helped me a lot. He insisted on talking to me every week just to check if I was okay. He helped me get the youth welfare office and the police involved so someone could keep an eye on my father. Since then, he has not hit my mother or me, he does not speak to me at all, and I also started therapy, which really helps me cope with his behavior. Without my teacher, nothing would have changed. First comment ever, and English is not my first language, so sorry for any mistakes. Story 36. I gave a student a hard time for being absent for a week. She told me she had to stay home to take care of her younger siblings because her parents had taken extra jobs. She was a very honest person, and that was sad. This was 20 years ago, and I feel bad about it. I learned from the experience and wanted to share. I also should not have said "gave her a hard time," which may have sounded mean. I was not mean. I was simply less sensitive than I could have been, and I regret that. Story 37. An animation student of mine pitched an idea about someone dancing and then running when the police came to break it up. When I did not understand why she started running, the student explained that women were not allowed to dance in public in her country. I am in the United States. She was from a Middle Eastern country and the school is online. I felt incredibly bad for her. Story 38. At the beginning of the year, I asked my students to write letters to me about their lives. This year, a student wrote that her father died by suicide in July. Last year, a student's father died from coronavirus disease 2019. Sometimes I think a student has a sad home life, but they are actually not sad about it. For example, a student experiencing homelessness a few years ago was always positive and joking. This year, a student told me he did not mind going into foster care because the woman at his house makes bomb quesadillas. Story 39. I taught a Year 7 pupil, 11 years old. He once stole a burger. I sat down with him to find out why. It turned out his father had run out of money, his mother was drinking herself into a coma, and the boy had turned to selling drugs to afford food. He had not done well that week and had no money for food. Luckily, Child Protective Services got involved to help him. He was a good child who wanted to be a doctor. On his estate, there were older youths who knew his father had left and that his mother was drinking. They took pity and bought him food, which is a tactic gangs sometimes use to recruit. Soon they started asking favors. Take this parcel, hold this parcel for us, don't let anyone know about it. And eventually he found himself standing on a street corner selling drugs. If you see signs of a child being abused or neglected, scruffy uniform, unexplained bruises, flinching when people move near them, or you witness abuse, please report it to the school or local authorities. Even if you do not know the child's name, give as detailed a description as you can. They may be hiding it at school as well. If you help report it, we can help protect the children. Safeguarding is everyone's responsibility. Story 40. When I came back to school after Christmas, one of my girls, who is 10 years old, told me her mother was arrested on Christmas Eve after she became drunk and high, argued with a neighbor, and pulled out a knife. The girl was then placed in foster care for Christmas with no presents or family because it was so last minute. It was very sad when she heard about everyone else's holidays. Story 41. When I was in 7th grade sex education class during a question and answer period, a girl asked a question that revealed she was being sexually assaulted by her father. He was arrested and jailed, and it was an extremely awkward moment for the teacher because the whole class learned at the same time. Story 42. A student with whom I had built trust gave me a letter describing the horrific experience he had a few years earlier of rape and molestation by family members. I checked with the school administration and he was no longer in that environment. Although they did not know all the details, it was true that he had experienced those things. He just wanted someone else to know, I think, and it is something I will never forget. Thank you to everyone for the kind messages and awards. I would like to add a little more. This child is one of unfortunately many who have shared similar traumas and experiences. My students have been raped, molested, sold for sex, beaten, neglected, sold for drugs, and more. I choose to work in high-needs, low-income schools because those kids need us the most. And they need your vote. When you vote, please consider each candidate's views on education. Our children are suffering in this country, and our educational system is very poor. Leaking ceilings, rats, chairs that break when you sit in them, and so on. Standardized testing is the worst. Schools that do well get funds. Schools that do not get funds get closed down. When schools are trying to teach children with that level of trauma and coming from homes that are hurting, there is no way to catch up. These children who suffer so much deserve so much more. I am one of many teachers who are there for them. We listen. We take on the weight of their pain. We truly love them. We are the teachers you wish you would have had, but most of us leave the profession before you would get that chance. So please vote with your heart and with good knowledge of each candidate. There are many votes you will be casting, and a straight ticket might eliminate a really good candidate for your local schools. If you can, consider volunteering at your local school after the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic. Children need people who care. They need adults who can show them the world is not as dark as it looks to them. or donate some supplies at any time during the year. They are sorely needed. It is true that we pay out of pocket. It is also true that we do not make nearly enough money to justify doing that. The world is kind of dark, but the children I have had the honor of teaching are the light. They truly are better than all of us. Story 43. I had a student who was acting out more than usual. I sat down with him privately to find out what was wrong. Both his parents were out of his life. I think his father had abandoned him and his mother was in prison for the long term, and he lived with his grandfather. He broke down in tears, telling me that his grandfather was very sick and dying. An aunt was trying to decide whether she wanted to take him after his grandfather passed or whether he would go into foster care with a stranger. It was so much pressure for a sixth-grade boy, and he was devastated. I have heard a lot of difficult stories from students in my career, well beyond what my sheltered California upbringing could have imagined. Children whose parents have told me they do not want to raise them. Children who have witnessed the death of a sibling. Survivors of many kinds of abuse. Children sobbing about their disabilities. A large, tough fifth grader who missed his father's cooking and was unsure if or when his father would ever be out of jail to cook for the family again. It is overwhelming. It has changed everything about my life, including how I vote. That one little boy will always stick with me. I often wonder how he is doing. Story 44. I'm a speech pathologist, not a teacher, but I was doing regular home visits with this young family. The little boy was not himself. He has autism and was more wriggly and emotional than usual. His mom went into the kitchen for a minute, and he whispered, "Dehemum." When she returned, he looked terrified. I asked what he had said. He cried and could not participate for the rest of the session. English was his second language, but he attended a mainstream school, so his language skills were fair. However, his pronunciation was often difficult to understand. His mom looked at him in confusion and stayed for the rest of the session. On the way home in the car, I realized he had been saying, "Dad hit Mom." I had left some items at their home, so I rang his mom to say I would pop by in the morning. I told her I was worried about her son. He just didn't seem himself. When I told her what I thought he had said, she broke down and admitted there had been severe domestic violence that had recently escalated. I reported it to community services and kept in touch with his mom. I supported her through legal aid. She eventually divorced the father, and she and her son both became Australian citizens. But my heart absolutely breaks that I did not understand what he was telling me at the time. This poor child was confessing the most frightening thing he had ever seen, and I responded, "What did you say? I didn't understand you." I think about it all the time. I wish I had understood him, scooped him into my arms, hugged him, and told him how brave he was for telling someone. He was only 5. I would have told him it was not his fault, that fathers should not hit mothers, and that he was loved. Story 45. I used to work as a nonprofit social worker in schools. As I've already told a story in response to another similar question, I will preface that this job gave me some pretty severe post-traumatic stress disorder. I have very few disturbing stories about this job. If you have someone like me in your school, your district is low on cash and has a high homeless population. My job was half counseling, half resource management, and a bit of after-school club and event organizing. A boy who was on the most vulnerable list came to me. Most of my caseload were on that list. That's why I was there. He came in and asked if I could go to his house to help his grandmother because he was scared. I often made house visits, sometimes with Child Protective Services, but often just to drop off food and make sure no one was being harmed. This boy lived in the back of an old Ford minivan and some tents with his grandmother, 2 sisters, and his mother. As he said, he hadn't been back inside since it got cold, so he was sheltering. I had called the shelters for him a few times, but will not go into that. His grandmother was dead. He asked me to call the police and an ambulance. After I finished my paperwork when school ended, I went to find the van, the tents, and the family. Sure enough, the grandmother was dead, curled up in the back seat under a large number of blankets. It was winter. I called the ambulance and then went home. I cried a lot and vomited. A few days later, he came back and asked if I could help with funeral expenses. I called my boss. She said no, we could not. but she gave me a list of churches in the area. I called around and pleaded my case without breaking privacy laws, but there was no help. I was living in a Mormon halfway house, and the landlady liked me, so I asked her. Her church could help. We had the grandmother cremated because it was cheaper, and we held a religious gathering for everyone. The boy wrote a thank you letter, and the parent met some supportive people. Story 46. I haven't used a fork and a knife in ages. I worked at a group home for children removed from their parents' care. One child had been completely raised by the television and was 10 years old, eating all his meals with his hands because he had never eaten with other people. Story 47. I kept having a student come to first period and fall asleep. That happens in high school. One day I made pancakes as a treat. The student stayed awake and ate 6 pancakes. Later the student told me they often did not eat breakfast because their parents did not buy food. When they had extra money, it went to alcohol. After hearing that, I bought breakfast food and left it out for anyone to take. The student did not fall asleep after that. I did not expect this to get so many responses, but I want to clarify. The parents did not qualify for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program or other aid because they earned too much on paper, even though in reality they did not have enough. I lived in the San Francisco Bay Area at the time. Although their income appeared high, most of it went to rent and living expenses. They also seemed to make poor choices, and the children often came last. One positive from the pandemic is that many schools now provide free food. It is wonderful to see. In the past, our district offered meals in the summer to any child under 18 who showed up, even if not enrolled in summer school. Someone said these parents should be judged. They do sound awful, but when I work with children, I remember that trauma is multigenerational. We do not know what shaped these parents' behavior. My mother grew up very poor and in an abusive home. Her parents were survivors of the Holocaust, and that experience deeply affected them. They did not know how to parent and struggled with mental health issues at a time when there was little support and a strong stigma around mental health. That trauma was passed on to my mother. She was a good mother but was not always emotionally available because of the attachment style she developed from her parents. The trauma was thus passed on to us. Now that I am a parent, I work hard not to pass on the negative patterns I learned, but changing behavior is difficult. I am not excusing these children's parents. While studying psychology, where I earned a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology, I learned that trauma can pass through generations. A teacher once told me something I always remember. Children can influence and change their parents' behavior. A parent's behavior and personality can change because of the child. I am not saying the student caused the parents to drink, but having a child with special needs, or a child who does not bond or behave as expected, can profoundly affect a parent. Yes, I reported these parents. I reported them to Child Protective Services several times. I reported the situation to school administration, spoke with the school psychologist, and spoke gently to the parents as well. Judging a parent is not helpful. Helping and educating a parent is what is needed. If the system fails, we can only do so much. If it takes spending $6 on a bag of pancake mix every month, I can do that. Sometimes we need short-term goals to meet before we can fix the long-term ones. If simply giving the student food when hungry helps, I will do that while we work on addressing the larger issue. When I started providing breakfast, I partly had this one student in mind, but I soon realized many students came to school hungry. Teens often have sleep problems and may not wake early enough for breakfast. Some cannot fall asleep until 3 in the morning. Others have severe anxiety and are awake all night. Many are simply not morning people. I also saw students from stable homes who came to school hungry because of reasons other than neglect. In this case, however, it was neglect. All I am saying is that we should avoid quick judgment. Sometimes we must find a short-term solution while working on the bigger picture. Story 48. I had a student who said she would have to drop out of the program because she had been arranged to be married. She would have been 14 at most. I had another who had to drop out to work in the family store after her father disappeared. Apparently, he had been picked up by the authorities and had not been seen or heard from in months. All in China, by the way. Story 49. I had a student once whose birth mother, who had to give her up because of addiction, died in the middle of the school year. We were on the school bus passing a graveyard on our way to a field trip. She said, "Look, Ms. Mia, that's where my mom is buried. She was in first grade." Story 50. I teach at a university. After class, a student told me she had been diagnosed with cancer. She said nothing could be done because her parents said treatment would be too expensive. 20 years later, I still remember her name. Story 51. Her mother was a heroin addict. Puncture wounds and scars on her arms were clearly visible at the parent-teacher meeting. She could barely speak. Her daughter was nonverbal, did not participate in class, and left exams blank. Story 52. A 4-year-old commented on my shoes. "My dad has the same shoes, but he is a drunk. Literally, what should I say to that?" Story 53. I taught robotics after school at a private school that fed into more prestigious and expensive private schools. I had one third-grade student who absolutely hated Fridays. He hated them because after robotics ended at 5, he went to test prep school for 3 more hours, did not get home until about 8:30 in the evening, and then did additional test prep for at least 3 hours on the weekend. His weekdays were also filled with piano lessons from a teacher he disliked. He told me that he absolutely needed to go to Harvard or the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, his father's alma mater. He ended up getting into his first choice school but was disappointed that he scored 98 instead of 99, the perfect score, on the entrance exam. It was not the most tragic thing about a child, but I felt bad knowing that his entire identity would revolve around being good at school. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.